I never thought the woman my son married would raise her hand and slap me in my own family celebration, then demand the keys to the house I spent my entire life building. One moment changed everything I believed about love, respect, and silence. What followed was not shouting, not revenge, but a quiet decision that exposed the truth and turned my world upside down. If you were humiliated by someone you trusted and they tried to take what you worked for, would you stay silent or would you stand your ground? Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from in the comments. Do not forget to subscribe so you do not miss the next story. May those who subscribe be blessed with good luck, good health, and may everything in your life become easier. Amen. I am Lenora Mae Whitfield, 67 years old, born and raised in Briar Hollow, Ohio. People in town know me as the woman who never missed a Sunday shift at the hospital laundry, the one who pressed uniforms so clean they smelled like safety. They also know my house. A narrow brick home on Juniper Street with a pecan tree in the yard and a porch that creaks when you step on the third plank. I paid for that house with my back, my hands, and years of quiet endurance. On the morning of my son Calvin's wedding, I woke before the sun. The house was still, holding its breath the way it always does when something important is about to happen. I stood in the kitchen, touching the counter I scrubbed every night for decades, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. I made coffee and drank it slowly, thinking about the boy I raised alone after his father died on a loading dock accident. I remembered Calvin at 6 years old, clinging to my leg on his first day of school, promising he would always protect me. By noon, I was dressed in my blue dress, the one I saved for special occasions. I pinned my hair carefully, smoothing the silver curls I earned 1 year at a time. Around my neck, I wore my mother pearls. She wore them when she cleaned white folks' houses, and she told me to wear them when I wanted to remember my worth. The wedding hall sat on the edge of town, a rented building with cream walls and blinking lights taped along the ceiling. Inside, the air smelled like roasted chicken, sugar frosting, and too much perfume. People laughed loudly. Music played louder than it needed to. I took my seat in the front row, hands folded, heart steady. Maribel Knox walked down the aisle like she owned the floor beneath her feet. She was beautiful, no denying that. Tall, smooth-skinned, with a smile practiced in mirrors. She did not look at me. Not once. When Calvin saw her, his face softened in a way I had not seen in years. I told myself that was enough. The ceremony passed quickly. Applause filled the room. People stood. Someone hugged me from behind and said I must be proud. I said yes because that was easier than explaining the tightness in my chest. The reception followed. Plates clinked. Glasses clanged. Maribel moved through the room greeting guests like a politician. Calvin stayed near her, nodding, laughing when she laughed. I sat quietly, watching. I noticed her eyes on me long before she came over. Sharp eyes. Measuring eyes. She approached with a tight smile and leaned down close to my ear. She said we need to talk. Her voice was sweet but cold underneath. I followed her toward the hallway near the restrooms, where the noise faded and the walls felt closer. She turned to face me and crossed her arms. Her smile disappeared. She said now that the wedding was done, we needed to settle things. I asked her what things. She looked at my purse and said the house keys. She said Calvin told her the house would be theirs. She said it was only right since they planned to start a family and my place was bigger than what they rented. I told her calmly that the house was mine. I said I was not going anywhere. Her face changed. The sweetness cracked. She stepped closer and said old women should know when to step aside. She said I was being selfish. She said family means sacrifice. I told her I sacrificed plenty already. That was when her hand came up. The sound was sharp and loud. My head snapped to the side. My cheek burned like fire. For a moment, everything went quiet, like the world paused out of shock. I tasted metal in my mouth. I did not fall. I did not scream. I stood there, steady, looking at the woman who had just struck me. She said, "Take the keys out now." People had begun to gather at the end of the hallway. Faces peeked around the corner. Whispers floated. I saw Calvin push through them, confusion on his face. He looked from her to me. He opened his mouth but said nothing. I reached up and touched my cheek. My hand shook, not from pain but from the weight of what had just happened. I looked at my son, the boy who once promised to protect me. His eyes slid away. Picked up my purse. I walked past them all. No one stopped me. No one spoke. My heels echoed against the floor until I reached the door and stepped outside into the cool evening air. I drove home alone. The house greeted me the same way it always did, with silence and safety. I locked the door behind me and sat at the kitchen table, the sting on my face still fresh. 30 minutes later there was a knock on the door. The knock came again, firm and impatient, as if whoever stood outside believed they had every right to be there. I did not move at first. I sat at the kitchen table, my purse still hanging from my arm, the house quiet except for the ticking clock above the sink. My cheek throbbed in slow waves. I could still feel the heat of her hand. I stood and walked to the front door. Through the peephole, I saw a man I did not recognize. He wore a dark jacket and held a folded envelope in one hand. Behind him, parked crooked near the curb, was a black sedan with tinted windows. I opened the door just enough to speak. He said my name carefully like he had practiced it. He said he was delivering a notice on behalf of Maribel Knox Whitfield. He said it was regarding property transfer. His voice was flat, professional, like none of this mattered to him. I told him I had just returned from my son's wedding and that I was tired. I told him he could come back another day. He said he could not. He said he needed confirmation that I received the document. I opened the door wider and took the envelope. It felt heavier than paper should. I signed where he pointed and closed the door without another word. I locked it. Then I leaned my back against it and slid down until I was sitting on the floor. My legs felt weak. Not because of fear but because something deep inside me had finally cracked. I opened the envelope with shaking fingers. Inside were legal papers, printed clean and confident, full of words meant to intimidate. It claimed that my son and his wife had rightful interest in my home. It demanded cooperation. It warned of consequences. I laughed once. A short, dry sound that surprised even me. They really thought I was foolish. I folded the papers carefully and placed them on the table. Then I went to the bathroom and looked at my face in the mirror. A red mark bloomed across my cheekbone, already darkening. I touched it gently. My eyes stared back at me, older than this morning but clearer. That night I slept in my clothes. I dreamed of my husband Samuel. His hands rough from work, his voice calm. He told me to stand firm. He always did. The next morning my phone rang just after 7. Calvin's name lit up the screen. Answered. He did not apologize. Not at first. He said Maribel was upset. He said she felt disrespected. He said things got out of hand. He said marriage was complicated. I asked him if he knew she slapped me. Silence stretched between us. Then he said she told him I was aggressive. Closed my eyes. I told him I raised him better than that. I told him I was not giving up my home. I told him I loved him. He said he loved me too, but his voice sounded far away. After the call ended, I made breakfast like it was any other day. Toast, coffee. Routine steadied my hands. Then I called Erlene Cobb. Erlene answered on the second ring. She had known me since we were girls running barefoot through Briar Hollow. When I told her what happened, she did not interrupt. She listened. When I finished, she said, "Good. Let them show their hand." She reminded me of the trust. She reminded me of the documents we signed years ago after Samuel died. She told me to come over. At Erlene House, we spread papers across her dining table. The records, old signatures, proof of everything I endured and protected. The land under my house was inherited through my mother. The structure itself was placed into a trust with conditions clear as daylight. No one could take it without my consent. Not my son. Not his wife. Not anyone. That afternoon Maribel called me herself. Her tone was sweet again, rehearsed. She said she hoped we could resolve things peacefully. She said legal routes were stressful for everyone. She said I should think about my age. I told her I was thinking very clearly. She hung up. By the end of the week, another notice arrived. This time official. County hearing was scheduled. My name printed bold at the top. I placed the letter beside my mother pearls and sat quietly. Felt no fear. Only resolve. They wanted to make this public. So be it. The days leading up to the county hearing passed slowly, each one heavy with memory. Briar Hollow moved the same way it always had. Cars rolled past my house. Children biked down Juniper Street. The pecan tree dropped leaves onto the porch like quiet company. Everything outside stayed normal, while something inside me settled into a deeper stillness. I did not call Calvin. I did not answer messages from relatives who suddenly remembered my number. Silence became my shelter. Every morning I woke before sunrise, made my bed and brewed coffee. I read the documents again and again, not because I doubted them, but because I wanted to feel the truth of my own life written in ink. At night, I sat on the porch and remembered. I remembered buying this house in 1989. I remembered the smell of fresh paint and cheap carpet. I remembered Samuel laughing as we carried boxes inside, promising this place would outlive us both. When he died, I remembered standing in the living room alone, holding Calvin's hand, wondering how I would keep the lights on. I kept them on by working double shifts, by washing blood-stained sheets, by folding uniforms while my fingers cracked from bleach, by saying no to rest and yes to survival. No one handed me this house, claimed it. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully. A gray suit, low heels, my pearls. I pressed my hair neat and steady. When I looked in the mirror, I did not see a victim. I saw a woman prepared to speak only when necessary. Erlene drove us to the county building. She parked close and squeezed my hand before we went inside. Her presence grounded me. She had always been that way. The hearing room was smaller than I expected. Beige walls, long table, fluorescent lights humming overhead. A few chairs filled with people who did not belong to me. Maribel sat straight-backed, her posture confident. Calvin sat beside her, eyes tired, hands folded tight. Neither of them stood when I entered. The county official called the case. Names were spoken. Papers shuffled. A lawyer on Maribel's side spoke first. He painted a picture of young love, family unity, and shared futures. He said I was being unreasonable. He said I was holding on to property that should serve the next generation. I listened. I kept my hands folded. Then my lawyer spoke. Quiet, direct, clear. He presented the trust documents, the land inheritance, the conditions written plainly years ago. He spoke of intent, of protection, of law. The official read through the pages slowly. The room felt tight. Maribel's face stiffened. Calvin stared at the table. The official looked up and said there was no legal basis for the claim. He said the house belonged to me entirely. He said any further action would be dismissed. Maribel stood abruptly. She said this was unfair. She said family should matter more than paper. She said I manipulated the system. The official told her to sit. I was asked if I wished to say anything. I stood. I said I raised my son with love. I said I worked my whole life to build something stable. I said respect is not given by marriage. It is earned by behavior. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not look at Maribel. I looked only at Calvin. His shoulders shook. The hearing ended. People stood. Chairs scraped the floor. Maribel stormed out first. Calvin followed slowly. He stopped near the door. He said he was sorry. Not loudly. Not confidently. Just enough for me to hear. He nodded. That was all. Outside the air felt lighter. Erlene smiled. And breathed deep. Justice did not feel loud or victorious. Felt quiet. Final. That evening I returned home and unlocked my door. I placed my keys on the table and sat down. The house wrapped around me like it always had. I knew things would never be the same. And I was ready for that. The morning after the hearing, I woke to sunlight pressing through the curtains like it had something to say. My body felt tired, but my mind was clear. The case was finished. The papers were settled. Still, the silence left behind felt heavier than the weeks of tension before it. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen sink, watching steam rise from the cup. This house had heard every version of me. The young wife, the grieving widow, the working mother, the tired woman who kept going because stopping was never an option. Now it was hearing the version of me who had finally been seen. Around mid-morning, Calvin came to the house. I saw his car pull up through the front window. He sat inside for a long time before getting out. When he finally knocked, it was soft, careful. I opened the door and stepped aside. He walked in like a guest, not like a son returning home. His eyes moved around the living room, landing on familiar things as if he was seeing them for the first time. The framed photo of his kindergarten graduation. The couch we bought secondhand. The small crack in the wall that never quite disappeared. He sat. I stayed standing. He said he did not recognize the woman he married anymore. He said things changed fast. He said pressure came from everywhere. Friends, social media, expectations. He said he felt trapped. I listened. I had learned long ago that listening did not mean agreeing. He asked me why I never told him about the trust. Why I never explained how the house was protected. I told him I should not have to explain how respect works. I told him love does not require surrender. I told him that if he truly believed this house was his, then he never understood what it cost. He cried then. Not loudly. His shoulders bent forward, hands covering his face. I watched him and felt a familiar ache. The same ache I felt when he scraped his knee as a boy and looked to me to fix it. But this time there was nothing I could fix for him. He left after a while. No hug. Just a quiet goodbye. That night Maribel messages came. Long paragraphs. Accusations mixed with apologies. She said stress made her act out. She said I embarrassed her. She said we needed to move forward as a family. I did not reply. Days passed. Then weeks. Calvin visited sometimes. Alone. He never mentioned her name. I never asked. One afternoon, Erlene and I sat on the porch shelling peas. She said some people believe marriage gives them ownership. She said others believe age makes people disposable. She looked at me and said I proved them wrong. I watched the street, listening to the rhythm of shells dropping into the bowl. I thought about how close I came to doubting myself. How easy it would have been to give in just to keep peace. But peace built on silence is not peace at all. That evening I slept deeply. For the first time in months, my dreams were quiet. Life did not return to normal. It shifted into something slower, more deliberate. I noticed details I once rushed past. The sound of my knees when I climbed the stairs. The way sunlight settled on the living room floor in the late afternoon. The smell of rain-soaked soil after a storm. This house and I were aging together. One morning, I opened the hallway closet to look for a blanket and found a box pushed far into the corner. I had not touched it in years. Dust coated the lid. Inside were old papers, folded letters, and photographs. My life before survival took over. I sat on the floor and went through them one by one. There was a photo of Samuel and me on the porch, smiling like we believed nothing bad could reach us. There were school drawings Calvin made. Crooked houses with smoke rising from chimneys. There were receipts from the early years, proof of every payment I never missed. At the bottom of the box was a notebook. I recognized my handwriting on the cover. Inside were lists, grocery lists, shift schedules, but also thoughts, fears I never spoke out loud, promises I made to myself when I felt invisible. I read until my eyes burned. That afternoon Calvin called. His voice sounded hollow. He said Maribel had moved out. He said they were taking space. He said he did not know what his life was supposed to look like anymore. I told him that confusion is not the same as loss. I told him he needed to sit with it instead of running from it. He asked if he could come by later. When he arrived, he brought nothing with him. No gift. No apologies rehearsed. He looked smaller somehow. We sat in the living room. Brought tea. He stared into his cup like it might answer him. He said he did not realize how much he depended on me until he watched someone try to take what belonged to me. He said he failed me. He said he was ashamed. I told him shame can teach if you let it. He asked me how I stayed strong all those years. I told him I did not always feel strong. I told him strength often looks like doing what needs to be done even when you feel alone. I told him I never had the luxury of falling apart. When he left, he hugged me. Like he meant it. That night I placed the notebook back in the box. I did not need it anymore. I had already survived what it recorded. Outside, the streetlights came on one by one. Briar Hollow settled into night. I sat in my chair and listened to the house breathe. For the first time I felt ownership in more than name. Autumn arrived quietly in Briar Hollow. Leaves gathered along the edges of Juniper Street, curling in on themselves like tired hands. I swept my porch every morning not because it needed it, but because movement kept my thoughts steady. Neighbors waved more often now. Some smiled with sympathy, others with respect. Word travels fast in a small town. Calvin began coming by every Sunday afternoon. He mowed the lawn without being asked. He fixed the loose cabinet hinge. He listened more than he spoke. The distance between us did not disappear, but it softened. Healing does not rush. It waits until you are ready to face what was broken. One Sunday, he told me Maribel had filed for separation. He did not sound angry, just tired. He said he realized how much of himself he gave away trying to keep someone satisfied who was never content. I told him that love does not demand you abandon your roots. He nodded. I could see the lesson settling in slowly, the way hard truths often do. I returned to routines I had set aside. I volunteered at the community center, folding donated clothes for families who reminded me of myself years ago. I cooked meals for Erlene when her arthritis flared. I sat in church again, not out of obligation but gratitude. I thanked Allah quietly for carrying me through seasons I did not think I would survive. One evening, as I watered the pecan tree, I noticed a young woman standing across the street. She introduced herself as Nina, a new neighbor. She said she admired how I handled myself when everything happened. She said it gave her courage to leave a situation where she felt small. I listened. I did not offer advice. I did not need to. Sometimes living honestly is enough. That night, I stood in my bedroom and looked around. The furniture was old. The walls needed paint. But everything in that room belonged to me in a way no paper could fully describe. I slept with the window open. Cool air moved through the curtains. I dreamed of Samuel again, but this time he smiled and said nothing. He did not need to. Winter came early that year. Frost clung to the edges of the windows like a warning. I woke before dawn, wrapped in a thick robe, and walked through the house turning on lamps one by one. Light filled the rooms slowly, patiently, the same way I learned to live my life. I began fixing things I had ignored for too long. A loose floorboard near the hallway. A leaking pipe under the sink. Small repairs that made the house feel listened to. When you take care of something long enough, it begins to respond. Calvin helped when he could. He no longer made promises. He simply showed up. I respected that more than words. One afternoon, Maribel came to the door. I saw her car first. A different one this time. Smaller. Less polished. She stood on the porch holding her purse tight against her chest. Her confidence was gone. What remained was pride trying not to collapse. I did not invite her in. I stood in the doorway and waited. She said she came to apologize. She said she was under pressure. She said she lost herself trying to become someone admired instead of someone decent. Her words came fast, practiced, but her eyes flickered with something real. I told her apologies do not erase actions. I told her striking an elder was not a mistake. It was a choice. She asked if I could forgive her. I said forgiveness is not permission. It is something I give myself, not something she can demand. She left without another word. After she drove away, I closed the door and leaned against it. My hands trembled. Not from fear. From release. That night, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter to myself. I wrote about the slap, the hearing, the silence. I wrote about the moment I chose not to shrink. When I finished, I folded the paper and placed it in the drawer where I kept important things. The house creaked softly around me, settling. Felt like agreement. Spring returned slowly, as if the town itself was cautious. Buds appeared on the pecan tree, small and stubborn. I watched them every morning while sipping my coffee, feeling something inside me stretch open again. Not joy. Not yet. The space. My body reminded me daily of my age. My knees ached when rain approached. My hands stiffened in the mornings. Still I moved with purpose. I rearranged furniture. I donated clothes I no longer wore. I cleared shelves and drawers, making room for what I had not yet imagined. Calvin started therapy. He told me this one evening while helping me carry groceries inside. He said he needed to understand why he stayed silent when it mattered most. I listened without judgment. Growth does not always look graceful. Some nights, loneliness crept in quietly. I would sit in my chair and hear echoes of conversations that no longer existed. I let them pass. I had learned not to chase what had already shown me its limit. At the community center, a group of women began gathering around me. Younger women, some with children, some without. They asked how I stayed calm, how I spoke without raising my voice. I told them calm is not the absence of anger. It is control over it. One afternoon, Nina came over crying. She said she finally left. She said it was terrifying. I made her tea and let her sit in silence until her breathing slowed. I did not rescue her. I did not need to. She had already chosen herself. That night I slept deeply. My dreams were not crowded. They were simple. Clean room. Open windows. Steady air. I woke feeling lighter than I had in years. By summer the house felt different. Not changed, just claimed. I moved through each room with intention, aware of where I placed my feet, aware of how my breath rose and fell. I no longer rushed. Time did not chase me anymore. Calvin came by less often, but when he did, he stayed longer. We talked about ordinary things. Work, weather, food. The kind of conversations that do not hide anything. One evening he told me he filed for divorce. He did not ask for my opinion. He simply shared it like a fact he had finally accepted. I told him I hoped he would learn to choose himself without hurting others. He said he was trying. The town moved on. Gossip faded. New stories replaced old ones. That was how Briar Hollow survived. People stumbled. People learned. Life continued. One afternoon, I received a letter from the county office confirming the trust records once more. Official. Final. I placed it in the drawer with my letter to myself. Some things deserve to be kept, not revisited. I stood in the yard that evening, watching the sky soften into orange and purple. The pecan tree rustled gently. I thought about my mother, about Samuel, about every version of myself that carried me here. I was not bitter. I was not triumphant. I was steady. For the first time, my name felt like enough. The first cool breeze of late summer slipped through the open windows one morning, carrying the smell of grass and distant rain. I stood in the kitchen, washing a single cup, listening to the soft clink of porcelain. The house felt settled, like it had finally exhaled after holding too much for too long. I no longer replayed the slap in my mind. Not because it did not matter, but because it no longer owned space inside me. What stayed was the moment I walked away. The moment I chose myself without shouting, without begging, without shrinking. My days became simple. I woke early. I prayed quietly, thanking Allah for breath, for memory, for endurance. I cooked meals that lasted 2 days. I rested when my body asked for it. I said no without explaining. I said yes only when it felt true. Calvin visited one last time before moving to another town for work. He stood in the doorway like he once did as a child, unsure but hopeful. We hugged longer than before. No promises, just understanding. He left with peace instead of guilt. That evening, I sat on the porch as the sun lowered itself behind Juniper Street. The pecan tree cast long shadows across the yard. I listened to crickets begin their song. The world continued, steady and indifferent, just as it always had. I was still here. In the house I built. In the life I defended. In the name I never gave away. This story teaches that dignity is not determined by age, status, or family ties, but by the courage to stand firm in self-respect. Silence does not mean weakness, and patience can be more powerful than anger. Respect must be given freely, not demanded through force or entitlement. A lifetime of sacrifice deserves acknowledgement, and true strength lies in knowing when to protect what you have earned without bitterness or revenge. Standing up for yourself does not always require loud words. Sometimes it requires clarity, truth, and the refusal to surrender your worth. This story is a work of fiction. All characters, events, and situations are created to appear realistic for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real people or real events is purely coincidental. The story is written to convey moral lessons and emotional reflection, not to represent real individuals. Thank you for listening and taking time to experience this story. If you found meaning or value in it, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Like the story if it touched you and subscribe for more stories like this.